I would now like to introduce today's presenters. Michael Jansen, Chief Research Officer, guides the practice's research agenda and architecture by leveraging his extensive experience to identify and unlock emerging trends. Amy Fong, Vice President, leads the practice's strategic outsourcing and vendor management membership, as well as custom projects to support procurement and supplier management. Parul Jain, Practice Director for Everest Group Global Sourcing Practice, leads the research and advisory offerings for workforce and location optimization. Abhishek Singh, Vice President, advises suppliers and buyers of enterprise technology on making the right choices using fact-based research. And with that, I'd like to turn things over to Michael. Take it away, Michael.
All right, thank you, Lucy. And I'm calling in from bright, sunny Dallas, Texas. We've had 10 days of rain. It's been cloudy, and I think we've had almost 10 inches of rain here. And so it feels really good to be looking at the sunshine. And we're going to kind of focus on the realities in front of us today. And so I'm joined by three of our distinguished analysts here at Everest Group. So we promise to get beyond the hand sanitizer guidelines. If you haven't done your social distancing, your deep cleaning, your hand sanitizing, please consult your local authorities or your local newscast. They can help you with that, but we're not here to talk to you about that. So with that, we wanted to just set a little context here about what's unique about this. And as we've talked to dozens of clients and service providers and other industry participants, there's no question that nobody has planned for this scope and the breadth and pace of what we're seeing. The unprecedented need to shelter in place, and I know that's still in various degrees of implementation, but it seems like it's becoming more prevalent around the world. That's different. The impact on health, so it's not a local conversation we're having here, but it's a global conversation on health and family. The consequences to supply chain travel and information flows has been just tremendously disruptive. Though we can all agree that the problem's big, I think one of the things we're going to talk about here is that we definitely have options that did not exist in the past. So the availability of information technology and the various technology solutions that we have given us new things that we can look forward to, and hopefully we come out of this stronger than ever before. So what I wanted to do to start with is actually wanted to get your temperature. And we really wanted to start out with a quick poll here, and we're going to open it up to just how are you doing? And really just kind of 5 fun answers here, and ask you to click the quick poll, and we'll just keep this open for just a few seconds here. But are you still freaking out mode? Still looking for toilet paper? I saw a picture of a Costco yesterday that had top to bottom rafters full of toilet paper. So maybe you can go check again if you need that help there. But what about your kid's teacher, home office? What do we got there? All right. So we'll lock it in 3 more seconds. Okay, you guys are great voters. Got over half you participating, 60%. Okay, let's bring the answer here to us. All right, so it's good. People are, this is way different than I thought it would be. People are adjusting to the new normal, and they like their new bubble. So it looks like we've got past the toilet paper stage. The teachers are still being appreciated more. So if you guys, I've seen lots of video conferences with people's kids kind of coming and going or hearing them. And some of them wishing they had the locking door. But it looks like the vast majority are adjusting to the new normal, and even appreciating their new bubble. So let's kind of go from there. So if I talk about the sunshine out there that came out today here in Dallas, we also got to think about this new opportunities, and how do we get to where are we going to be at in the new normal in the next quarter or beyond. And in talking to a segment of our clients and people in the industry, there is no doubt this is a flurry of activity out there. Some people, especially that are on the services side of the equation, they're having all kinds of opportunities presented to them to help people immediately. I need bodies. And if you're listening to the newscast, Amazon says they're hiring 100,000 folks. CVS says they're looking for 50,000 folks. And in services industry that we talk to, things around delivery services, all things work from home, telemedicine. There's going to be some once-in-a-lifetime investment opportunities. People are really looking at it and saying, how do they ensure that, as the saying goes, let no crisis go go untended in terms of opportunity. All right, so let's talk about where we're at right now. And so, so if you can break hard. So one of the things to think about here, you can look at this crisis in terms of going into a racetrack analogy here, where you can break hard in the curve. And if anybody knows, if you know anything about racing, that's not necessarily the right thing to do. And the way that the terminology I'm told is, you want to drift through the curve or power through the curve, and that's what we're going to be focused in on today. So let's talk about the curve itself. And so we've put together with our analyst team kind of a way to think about this in terms of the magnitude of the impact. And so, I think our initial impact, our initial review, and this will vary on your perspective depending on where you're at in the world today. But initially, I think everybody's first reaction was ignore it. It's a Chinese virus, as some people have said. I'll keep away from the politics there, but it's something that is somebody else's problem. And then reality hit home pretty quickly that, oh my God, it's here. And the first reaction for many people was to go buy that toilet paper. I think, we're going to, again, depending on where you're at, there's also going to be another stage we're going to focus in on pretty quick, which is, hey, it's spring. This is not really impacting anybody that I know close. And hey, what are we doing here? Maybe we need to get back to work here and let's go. Then I think we're going to hit another dip down here where, hey, this is really impacting home. We know somebody that's been deeply impacted health-wise or financially. And then when we get past that, we're going to learn to live again. And I think that's where I think we're all looking forward to kind of looking for that positive side. And I know there's some regions of the world that are kind of, coming out of their shelter in places and are moving back. And then we're going to get back to work. And I know that, at some point, hey, this is, hey, we got out of work for a little while, but I think we all generally want to get back to work. We want to be productive in society. And then beyond that is really the new and improved normal. And again, I think that's where we're going to have some reflections that we can discuss today as well. So put that in kind of the down the road look. So Amy, talk to us about where you think folks are at right now in the different geographies.
Sure. So I think we see different countries in different places, and then even within certain countries like the U.S., where we're broadly dispersed and different, states are taking different positions as we move through this. We see a lot of variation. So if you look at China, their numbers are starting to get a little bit better. They appear to be coming out of it. Italy, we know, is still in the thick of it, although, depending on the day, the numbers seem to be improving a little bit. In the US, I think myself on the West Coast, Abhishek on the East Coast, we've been sheltering in place for well over a week now, and this has hit home, getting to the point probably this week where everyone knows somebody who has the virus, and we're taking action. Whereas there are certainly parts of the US where, you may still not have any, legal direction or political direction on sheltering in place, different language, different stances on certain activities. So I think we see quite a bit of difference there, and some areas already facing the overburdening of healthcare delivery, which is what we all kind of fear, and struggling with compliance. So, this is really a day-to-day thing. We'll see these arrows move. I think a lot of people are projecting this is the week when these arrows move quite a bit for the U.S. And if you're somewhere else in the world, you fall somewhere on this curve, and that's probably pretty dynamic as well.
Okay, so we're not going to try to portray the exact consequences of the health part of the conversation, but we can talk about how this impacts the global services marketplace. So the market that we focus on service provider and shared services. And so we've gone to our data, and we track all these centers site by site from all different internal and external service provider sites. And so, Pearl, you have been tracking this very closely. You know where all these sites are at. Give us your assessment in terms of volume and impact across the world.
Absolutely, Michael. So just gauging the impact of, the number of COVID cases that we've seen and the size of the market, right? So there are three clear clusters. So one is China and US, where the number of cases are high. But if you just look at the global services market, the sheer size of the markets, it's relatively slow. So it's a high risk zone. The other cluster towards the extreme left and multiple locations there, smaller in size in terms of the global services market, but basically the impact is relatively lower because you see most of the organizations have larger centers in the locations like India and Philippines, which is actually the most vulnerable zone right now. So you've got higher concentration of headcount there. But the situation hopefully doesn't get worsened. But if it does get worse, there's significantly kind of a strong concern here. We are seeing most organizations kind of already invoking their BCP measures, remote working methodologies. So that's kind of enabling it to get better, but there are still some concerns around adequate equipment, data protection regulations, and access.
So Abhishek's going to come back with some specific stories about some of the responses, and we're especially examining the India situation. That's very fluid right now. There's been some changes in just the past 48 hours there that we're going to talk about, and so Abhishek and Prue will come back and address those. I would say one thing on the far left there. Lots of smaller sites, locations like Poland and Canada and Singapore. We're not saying those are unimportant, because if you do have a large location of your services provided there, that will be very impactful for you. But on the whole, the thing that we're watching for is both those India and Philippines sites on the far right. So we promised we're going to show you a multi-view on this, kind of a 360 view, looking at 3 different stakeholders and 2 different time horizons. So we're not going to focus on the general must-dos, other than to say that we know people right now are conducting their assessments, they're implementing their plans, as Parul said, trying to ensure safety, and then as we look forward here, we know where they're going to be thinking about in terms of getting ready for that new normal. We're going to bring it to you with each of our analysts here, both in a service provider view, and when I say service provider view, this is talking to the enterprises, their view of what to expect from their service provider. So it's not a conversation to service providers specifically. We do have lots of other content on recommendations for service providers themselves, but this is the enterprise view of what they should expect from their service provider. We're also going to take the perspective of procurement. So Amy's going to talk to us about that. And then we'll have Parul back to talk about the global business services or the shared services, GBS centers, and so we'll take that perspective. We want to do another quick poll here to bring in the perspective of where you think. So this is a much more serious poll here. We want to understand the extent that you've seen service disruptions. And so what we're asking right now is, kind of a graded scale here of we haven't seen anything, not too worried about it, all the way up through yes, and they're causing real business disruptions. So let's get your perspective on where this stands right now. Okay, got a third, got a half. We'll leave it open for another 3 seconds here, Peter. All right, we got 2/3 of the vote in. Let's just take a look here. Okay, so the biggest cluster right there is some minor disruptions, but nothing too critical. I think everybody's got some degree of worry, just a very few folks that aren't worried. But I think still the clustering is still on the relatively good side. There are roughly a third of you that are starting to see some real problems, or they have experienced real business disruptions. So we're going to actually, so it's a good kind of a bell-shaped curve here. We're actually going to send out another poll in a week and via email to the people in this webinar. We're going to actually see how this changes over the next week. So please look at that email when that comes, and you kind of get a sense for yourself how your peers are being impacted. Okay, all right, so let's move into some of the content. And in this section, what we're going to do is I'm going to bring it to Abhishek. Pretty safe to say that nobody had a business continuity plan that contemplated this big of an action that was truly global in nature. You and I and the rest of the team have been talking to service providers over the last 2 weeks, and we've been listening to what they're saying and hearing what their reactions are. Abhishek, take us through what you're seeing and hearing.
Absolutely, Michael. So let me start off by saying something which is clearly obvious. This is a black swan event, something that none of us were prepared for, not even the service providers, not enterprises, not any other participants in the industry. And so if you look at what's really happening in the market, and I spent like the last few months let me correct myself. This does seem like months have passed, but I would say, let me correct myself by saying last few days. Speaking to around 14 leading service providers who are operating in this space, the large ones. And having spoken to them, I saw a very simple framework being laid out as to how they are trying to plan for it. There is a struggle happening between how to manage the here and now, which is managing the day-to-day operations, and also at the same time thinking about what to do when things become normal. But fact of the matter is, almost everybody is focusing right now on the here and now of it. So let's look at some facts to consider as you work with your service providers in trying to wade through this crisis. Now, even when you look at these 4 highlight bullet points that I have laid out for you here, there are 2 categories here. One, the set of facts which request you to be aware of what's really happening with your service provider portfolio or how they would be reacting to it. And the second one is around those areas wherein you need to be supportive as well as empathetic to the situation that they are facing. So let's look at the aspects of which you need to be aware of. Now, the question in your minds would be, why beware? Here are some aspects to be focusing upon right now. First fact, not all service providers are equally prepared to deal with this situation. I'll be coming back to this preparedness aspect on slide number 14, wherein I'll be taking you through a checklist of things that you should be going through with your service providers, but more on that later. Second aspect is location risk exposure. And Parul did talk about the fact that there are locations which have different variety of risk. There is an entire spectrum of risk that you are exposed to depending on where your service providers operate from. But last and not the least is the priority tiers aspect. Remember, just as doctors triage on which patients to treat first in a crisis situation, in a pandemic situation, service providers will also be triaging on which clients to prioritize as their resources and investments get stretched. And hence, you need to be working very closely with your service providers to figuring out how they are planning for it. So that's the beware part. Now, let's look at some of these action items wherein you need to be aware of the challenges that your service providers are facing. Going back to the same point that I made earlier, this is a fast evolving situation, and hence your service providers are also struggling with local regulations, industry standards, client policies, etc. So they have supply realities that they are challenged with. Some of them, by the way, are function of the environment that they work in, whether it's countries, whether the clients, whereas there are some which are of their own making. And the third bullet point that you see here is actually related to that, which we see clearly panning out as a big challenge in ensuring service continuity when it comes to remote work, ensuring there are sufficient number of laptops, being in situations wherein they are operating out of custom bonded locations, they cannot even take those devices out of those, and working with clients which mandate that you work out of secured perimeter offshore development centers, which do not really allow you to enable remote work as swiftly.
So Abhishek, let me just ask you a question there. What's the reality happening right now? You and I and others have been talking to them directly. Are they 20% normalized? Are they 80%? What's the kind of sense that you have in terms of the work from home, and how's that working?
That's a very interesting question, and some of the anecdotes that I ended up gathering in my conversations actually threw me off balance. I have to admit that. Fact of the matter is, when we are talking of delivery geographies, India and Philippines happen to be the largest locations. Specifically on India, which is the largest location when it comes to IT services, what we witnessed is that most companies which operate out of India locations give laptops only to 30% of their employees. Typically, the thumb rule is managers and above. So we are talking about a range anywhere between 60 to 80% of people who are delivering services for you not having laptops, which constrains their ability to move out of office locations in the case of a lockdown and be able to work seamlessly out of their homes. And that is becoming a huge challenge. Now, in the last 2-3 days, I have seen a lot of frenetic activity around procurement, wherein service provider CEOs are reaching out to device manufacturer CEOs and trying to ensure procurement and supply chain. But this is a last minute action, and I don't think this is going to stabilize anytime in the 7 to 8 days to come. But then there are some standout examples too of vendors who had anticipated not really a pandemic-like situation, but were managing risks more appropriately, who were better prepared. They had better action plans around remote work and work from home, who are wading through this much better. So there is an entire spectrum, and that is what I like to call out here, that as you think through your risks and liabilities, as you look through your vendors and how they are managing this crisis, there is an entire list of things, entire list of risk appetite that you need to be kind of going through in consultation with them to be sure that your business continuity objectives are met. Next slide, please. So this is a continuation of the topic that I'm currently on. I'll not spend a lot of time talking through it, but let me just repeat that fact again. We are in a black swan event. Nobody is really prepared for it. But if you look at the different kind of disruptive events for which organizations typically prepare for, even for a pandemic, nobody was really prepared to deal with a pandemic of this proportion that we are currently dealing with. Hence, as you think of your risks, think of all these array of risk categories that you are going to deal with, how they would apply in these situations, and how your vendors will be able to deal with. Now, the question in your mind is, if this is going to be indeed this complex, is there an easy way out? The quick answer is not really. But there are certain things that you can really ensure in trying to get to a base level of service continuity, and also ensuring that as situation starts to improve, you will be back on your feet like you were before the crisis started. And that is why I want you to focus on certain checklist items that you should be going through with your service providers. Next slide, please. So what you see in front of you is not rocket science. The question here is, how should you be keeping a tab? What you see in front of you are some simple logical categories of health check that you should be running on your service operations with your vendors. So whether these are fundamental aspects of ensuring health and safety of employees and contractors, or certain aspects related to operational continuity, ensuring IT preparedness, then this whole aspect of risk that we talked about comes under the aspect of mitigation, wherein you should actually be asking your service providers to provide their account level, industry level, location level service continuity plans, so that you can be assured that you are on the right track and that you have the right level of comfort in managing and wading through the crisis. But last but not the least is the very important aspect of how you should be forcing your service providers to ensure a level of comfort, and that is all about messaging. So it's not only about communicating to you on all of the aspects that are in the first 3 items, but ensuring that there is enough commitment that is getting shown to you from their senior executives. There are operational updates that are happening to you at periodic levels. This will determine not only how you will manage services in the next few weeks, but how also you will be dealing or continuing to procure services in these difficult times. Now, having dealt with service continuity, let's deal with the procurement aspect, which my colleagues, Michael and Amy, will be taking you through.
Right. So, Amy, you talk to procurement leadership all the time, all day long. We know that supply assurance and cost savings, supply assurance first, and then cost savings as we deal with the economic realities here. Those are 2 fundamental procurement competencies or capabilities. What are these folks telling you?
Sure, Michael. So let's start with what we do right now. What's our immediate role as a procurement organization? Nearly everyone I know in either supply chain, procurement, services, sourcing, any kind of sourcing or supplier-facing role has been called to action recently, or is thinking about what they need to do next. And I think the immediate focus has been health and safety, remote work related supplies, right? How do we get all of our employees working from home? How do we make sure they're safe? If you're depending on your industry, you may need to be sourcing specific materials, and there's a shortage of quite a few of those. So there's some very quick assurance of supply. But next step is really assessing the supply base. And I've talked to quite a few people who've spent their last few weeks going through BCP plans, looking at what's in their contract and where do they need to chart new territory. And this is definitely a chart new territory for many. Looking at your mix of make versus buy, where can we shift internal, external, where do we shift between providers and locations? I think when we're talking about outsourcing, many of us have been relying on single location models, and Parul will talk about that in a little bit. But getting to some of the needs of the service providers and what they're looking to do to survive and to continue their support, it's requiring us to be really flexible. Abhishek mentioned a couple of challenges around laptops and remote work, and a lot of our MSAs don't allow for the accommodations that are needed. So, my advice there is that you need to look at where you have strong relationships and be flexible with the solutions that providers are putting in place. They are acting quickly and trying to solve the problem to the best of their ability. And as you saw, there hasn't been as many service disruptions as we may see in the supply chain side. But that's requiring us to bend our cultures and our expectations quite a bit in the interim, which is difficult from a contracting perspective for many procurement people. Another thought is just thinking about what projects we had in motion, a month ago. Now is not the time to be switching large suppliers and switching strategic partners. Your incumbents are going to be easier to work with, more secure to work with remotely, where you already had a relationship. Building new relationships from a remote situation is not ideal. So think about that. I'm sure a lot of people are putting sourcing projects on hold and looking to leverage some of that goodwill. I think the way to approach that, I would say, is to look at 6 to 12-month extensions in your current contracts. You don't need to shut down suppliers, an RFP, but you can pause it for a little bit until we get through this. No one is focused on that kind of activity anyway. Finally, shoring up some short-term costs. So I think in the very near term, looking at our staffing rates and our service levels, are we overscoped? Is our skill and role mix correct? Is the market pricing on point in all of our services agreements? If you are above market, now is the time to go in and try to correct that, even if you're still in a contract. It's time to look. A lot of the roles are very dynamic. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but this is the time to really be jumping on those opportunities. In general, I think now is a time to be wary of long-term commitments. Think about how you can be flexible, how you can be agile as a procurement organization and as a business, and look at the short-term changes that you can make to fill the gaps. As we look more long-term, there's really 3 areas that I see procurement as we come out of this. And I'll say I do see a lot of questions in the chat of when will we come out of this. I don't think any of us are going to try to predict the health and business timing of a pandemic, but we know that at some point we will be back to a business as new normal. So what do we do as a procurement organization? The first thing I start with always is stay close to your stakeholders. Your stakeholders in the business who own these categories know what is needed. 3 areas that I think are going to be the way that procurement can really shine, what we're going to be called to do. And the first is cost cutting. We know we're headed into a tough financial economic situation. Think about demand management. If we can live without things now, we're going to come back in and say, what can we continue to live without that? Use benchmarking. We'll talk about cost benchmarking or rate benchmarking in a minute. And I think that's important to think about not being above the market in any of our cost areas or spend areas. revisiting our agreements and our long-term contracts and attacking any new categories where you haven't really had the opportunity to get in and influence the spend. Now may be the impetus. I always tell procurement people, you know, it's either a leadership change or an external inflection point that drives more procurement engagement and drives our strategic role. And this is probably it for a lot of you. Risk is the next area where we really have an opportunity to readjust and step up. I think when we come out of this, we'll be reassessing how we balance risk with cost to mitigate. You can't mitigate 100% of your risk, but maybe the slider was not where we needed it to be. We're going to have to recreate a lot of our business continuity plans and disaster recovery and think about two things I think that are really important there. One is the financial supplier risk. So coming out of 2008, we saw a lot of suppliers fail. What do we need to do to prevent that? We need to know who's at risk now. If we have financial supply chain tools in our source to pay systems, we need to be turning those on and figuring out how we're going to use them. That's an area that I think we're in a much better position to mitigate than we were 10 years ago, but we need to be thinking about it right now today because we're weeks away or months away from that. And then I think we're going to come out with better justification and more of a focus on technologies and market intelligence that helps us monitor and mitigate supplier risk. The final thing that I want to push on a little bit is just agility. We need to come out of this and we need to start this now thinking about how we view risk versus volume leverage. We've erred a lot towards volume leverage when you look at those locations. How do we shift that in the future? We need to think about our supply base and performance, flexibility, geographic differentiation. You know, how do we scale our agreements up and down? And our workforce is going to change, right? We're going to probably allow more for remote work or at least more flexibility, but also how do we increase our reliance on automation in certain areas? This is a great push to do a lot of things around automation and information that you may not have had a good justification before. But I think coming out of this, the story is going to be much clearer for many procurement organizations. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Michael and Parul to jump into the GBS view.
Yeah, so Amy, a couple reactions there. One is I think this is going to be the time to find out who your real partners are. And I think as you know, you listen to what Abhishek was talking about and Amy, what you're talking about here. I think the first question is to get the, you know, folks are going to look to get the job done, and then we're going to look to sort out the contractual terms. And I think right now we're in that first phase, but it's going to come quickly. If any experience, I've been around the industry a long time, and experience would say that, hey, eventually this economic challenges that we're going to have is going to really lean on the procurement organization to help us find those savings in our new normal. So let's do this. Let's move this over to, and the one thing I want to add, we're actually going to have an option here at the end for you to get a free piece of additional research on those, what is the fair market rate for some of those services. Pearl, I want to talk to you about the GBS. You know, you're out there talking to folks in the field every day about how they're reacting. What are you hearing?
Interesting things, Michael. So if we look back and compare it to what Abhishek mentioned about the provider side, I think GBSs have handled it reasonably well. So, I mean, at a broad level, we see most of the organizations had built in strong business continuity plans. They already had those things in place. Not only that, we are seeing some of the organizations, you know, they've been able to ensure that about 90, 95%, even 100% of their operations are running smoothly right now in a remote working model. And this has been partially due to the fact because they've tested their work from home strategies, tested their BCP strategies timely in a yearly manner. I mean, even before the numbers in India were very high, you know, the company started testing out work from home policies on a rotational basis to just iron out any issues. Now, so just looking at the things that most of the organizations have done already, right? So most of the organizations have already ensured that travel restrictions are there, health precautions just to minimize the entire exposure to the workforce, they're already in place. Wherever possible, most of the organizations have shifted to remote working models. In case there are organizations which have heavy reliance on desktops, we've seen organizations kind of ensuring that they procure laptops from their providers at premium prices in a very short span. Within a week, from 0% to about 40-50% is kind of migration we are seeing from desktop to laptops as well. Along with that, there is a increased leverage of online e-learning platforms, tools to kind of ensure that the collaboration is there, the workforce kind of feels more integrated. Those are the things that most of the organizations have already done. Talking about the aspects that can kind of help organizations, GBSs, weather out the storm in a much more stable manner. So things around invoking protocols, BCP plans for different scenarios. So having different kind of plans for different locations. For instance, if a hub location is impacted, GBSs may move the time-sensitive work to a spoke location. If a spoke location is impacted, shift work to if other sister spoke locations are available, or back to the source site. Similarly, if work can be supported remotely, right, then organizations are prioritizing highly critical work streams. Or if the work cannot be supported remotely, right, so the kind of splitting work to evaluate if they can do work which requires high bandwidth on a rotational basis, or deprioritize some of the works which is not time sensitive. So according to the dependency, criticality of each work stream, of importance of each location, there's a different business continuity plan in action. Secondly, around not just managing workforce that is in-house, but also kind of thinking broad-based here, thinking about the work which is outsourced to third-party providers, vendors. GBSs should consider revisiting the terms of their existing new contracts, especially those that are large or span across multiple years, to kind of manage contractual risks. And thirdly, essentially, I mean, while ensuring operations run as per discipline is critical, it is also equally imperative to sustain the true essence of your organization's cultural DNA, right? So to keep your communication channels open, kind of do some fun activities to ensure there is positive employee engagement across the organization. Michael, over to you.
Yeah, so Pearl, I look at the GBS organizations as being kind of the backbone of the organization in terms of getting a lot of stuff done for the entirety. Abhishek, we've talked about some of the opportunity here for GBS organizations to really step up. And have you heard any stories where we've heard, the unsung heroes of the infrastructure or the engine, if you will, here in some of these large services organizations? Have you heard any stories here that are inspirational?
Indeed, Michael. In fact, I had so many examples that I could have taken you all through. But the one that I wanted to focus on, and borrowing from the theme that Parul is currently on, which is around the preparedness aspect, as to how GBS organizations working out of India especially were somehow prepared to deal with this crisis much better than vendors. So for example, I was having this, and let me relate this example. I was having this conversation with the head of innovation of a European insurance company who operate their GBS out of Bangalore. And she ended up mentioning this to me, and I'm just quoting her. She was telling me, Abhishek, if you know Bangalore and know Bangalore's traffic, it is a service continuity disaster always waiting to happen. That was the punchline. And to ensure that we wade through it, we always had this approach of ensuring that there will come a time wherein we'll have to rely upon remote work some way or the other. Obviously, it was not focused on dealing with a pandemic, but the things that they did were pretty amazing for me. I mean, everyone in the organization has laptops. Now, that's a minor thing. But things such as mandating everybody to work from home at least once a week was preparing everybody for it. I think of that as a drill that was happening within that organization as a cultural thing, as an organizational theme thing. And then minor things such as employees getting reimbursed for both internet dongles or broadband, so that even if they are stuck in traffic or something like that, they could work. If they are traveling home, they could work anywhere. So that in itself created this whole aspect of being prepared for it. But what I'd like to highlight here is the one thing that I heard from her. Right now, when they are dealing with this situation, you know what they're focusing on? Not on the health safety aspect, on which they are fairly well prepared. They have ensured remote work and all of that. currently they are rolling out a behavioral health plan in trying to manage anxiety and stress that their employees are currently dealing with in this current situation. That I think is an above and beyond example for me.
So what we ask you to do is we'd like to hear from you on your inspirational stories, and either in the chat window or send us an email. I'd love to hear how you or any stories out there for where people are going above and beyond, not just to get the job done, but to help the organization succeed, help the community succeed. So type in those in the window. I know that, you know, in natural disasters of other kinds, people are always, it always brings out the good in people. They're always volunteering to help do the cleanup or folks that have been particularly hurt. What are the stories that you're hearing about or trying to implement with your organization, specifically on a kind of a B2B standpoint? What are they doing to help the organization succeed? So love to hear your stories on that. All right, Pearl, just want to get an idea. You know, we talk about the building the business case and multiple locations being part of that. You've got an example here.
Yes, Michael. So this is an example of how we assisted one of our clients in ensuring business continuity preparedness. So essentially, starting with identifying different dimensions of business continuity that are the most relevant for them, then assessing the relevant relative financial impact in terms of US dollars for different kind of disruptive events based on their probability, and basically looking at quantifying the cost of restoring delivery. And then thirdly, evaluating the implications of alternative location footprints with the business continuity financials. So net, what we're saying is, see, BCP comes at a cost, but it has to be measured against the benefit it might reap. So think of this as, cost for the insurance of the overall BCP plan that you may have. So this just kind of gives an overview of how to look at the cost which you might incur and the cost that you have to incur based on the investment you make for your business continuity plans. We'll now talk more about the GBS, the new normal, after once this entire, they've weathered through the storm. How do we envision the 7-point blueprint for the new normal for GBSs? So here's where I would definitely like to draw attention, right? Now, GBSs already have a bright future. However, COVID will now kind of influence some of their priorities, expectations, framing of objectives. Now, if you look at this, right, what we've done is cater at different tangential aspects here. So think about leadership, talent, the ways of working overall of the workforce. While essentially we're seeing leaders geared to more towards how to operate in a steady state, willing to cope up with kind of the nuances, some disruptions on a reactive basis. However, going forward, we believe leaders will also have to be agile, not only in changing plans and work schedules, but also in kind of their leadership styles. For instance, in the current situation, a more participative leadership style will be more appreciated and suit kind of in the entire situation right now. If you talk about talent, right, in GBS specifically, it's heavily reliant on interpersonal interaction. However, going forward, we'll see accelerated adoption of technology across different talent lifecycle aspects, right? Even in acquisition, L&D, overall performance measurement, etc. Ways of working, we've already talked about that remote working, which was initially viewed as just as a one-time or kind of a BCP measure, will now be viewed more as an integral design element across the entire working of the GBSs. At a broad technology level, we definitely see accelerated adoption, more bolstered up investments across different facets of the technology to kind of focus not only at improving efficiency, driving resiliency, but also saving up costs. Agility, we've talked about, it has been in the mind, it has been a boardroom topic, but it will now see more embedding in the entire organizational DNA and the ethos. Key point here around BCP orientation. Most of the plans that GBSs have drawn upon, they've assumed that one or two sites might get disrupted due to a natural disaster or some other kind of situations. However, with a situation like the current one, where there are cases, multiple site multiple sites can just stop operating at the same time. So there will be revised business continuity plans drawn up, evaluating, obviously, looking at the trade-offs that one has to think about, where cost versus the benefit analysis. So essentially, it's a common misconception that multi-location portfolios guarantee BCP success. However, what we think is multi-location portfolios should be viewed as an enabler to BCP, not BCP itself. So you need to intentionally think about whether two locations, they have similarities, some overlap in their work, so that one location can kind of take on the work of another in case of an emergency. So all that thinking through, all that more need-based intentional approach has to go into how you chart out the business continuity plans for GBSs.
Hey, Michael, before you jump in, I just want to chime in. Just 10 minutes back, Indian Prime Minister announced a complete lockdown in India. So the implication of that is whether you are a service provider or an enterprise having a GBS in India, the remote work activity has to be kicked in now. Just wanted to update that.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for the real-time update there. Okay, so we have an offer for you. In our brand promises, tagline is around with you on the journey, and so we're offering here 3 ways to help for our enterprises, those that are buyers of services. And the first offer here is if you want a complimentary supplier risk profile and you want us to have a quick conversation around one of these 24 prominent service providers. We have that based on the information we put together. This won't talk about specifically where they're at in the very moment, but we'll have their general risk profile that we've gathered up as of Q1 of this year. The offer number 2 is a services labor rate comparison. We'll give you a complimentary price check if you're interested. 3 roles, 3 countries, with a certain set of opportunities to talk about those different 5 functions in those 10 countries, or in just a general question. If you have questions that we can help you on around risk exposure and the things that you see there, happy to talk to you with those. So we're going to open a quick poll that'll enable you to have a one-click push a button here, and that'll trigger us to follow up with you to get you those offers. And if you're interested and you're an enterprise, happy to provide those to you. And if you're not, just click on there. None at this time. That's fine. I see a number of people are asking for both the rate checks and the service profiles. So happy to do that. We'll give you that open for another 10 seconds here. And you can also reach out to us. We're going to have our email addresses here shortly at the very end, and there will be another pop-up window at the end to provide that for you. So appreciate your if you're interested in taking up on those offers. Let's move on, Peter. Okay. So as we bring this to conclusion here, I use the term a racing term at the very beginning. How to drift the curve or power through the curve. Our suggestion is that you use this pause. Let's call it a pause to really think about what's going to be important and really position for those improvements coming out of this pause. It's not a time to sit here and hit the brakes and stop everything, but rather use this time to reflect on putting together those detailed plans. This crisis will abate, like they all do, and the stakeholders are going to look to figure out where we can do to be better. Look on the next provocation we have here, that focus on that recovery. Do no harm here. Let's get through this with as little pain as possible, but you will be judged not on the extent of the dip, but on how you react in the recovery. And so as leaders, we have the expectation that we can do better, and we will do better. And the third one we want to bring up here is there's going to be an appetite to make that change happen. So the transformation, modernization, if you will, the need to save costs will be part of the impetus here. But I think we're going to realize that, hey, there were opportunities around automation and other digital transformations that we have been thinking about, and now we realize how valuable those would have been in this kind of environment. So again, we are going to have some pauses here. We just heard the news from Abhishek that's going to cause disruption. There's going to be real pain, but this is also time to pause. And while we're in our home offices, we're sheltering in place, we can still communicate and get together with our teams, get together with your partners in the industry, and make things happen. So I just want to, you know, I know I've personally been busy, and the whole rest of our team has been busier than ever before as we try to react and try to plan for what's on the other side of this. So with that, let's bring this to a close. I think, you know, don't lose sight of that future. I think one of the things that we will all walk out of this here with is an appreciation for what we have, an appreciation for our personal lives and our families, an appreciation for our work. We do believe there will be a significant difference in how we view the workplace. You know, I've been working out of my home office here for 20 years, but others are just now going through that experience. And that may cause shifts all over the place in terms of communication strategies and the need for videos and maybe a little less for brick and mortar on the office space. We may have to rethink that. And not only that, but be enthusiastic about building something better. I think we can all look at this as an opportunity and patch up those things that weren't quite so right and make them better in the future. And again, keep your eye on the ball. Where are we trying to go? And so some people are going to come out of this much stronger and much healthier in the long run. So let's focus on that. So with that, I've seen pages and pages of questions here, and I'm just reading some of them here right now. And of course, we're going to get you the slides, and so don't worry about that. There's lots of questions on that. Looks like Abhishek, I see a comment here more than a question. 21 days of lockdown in India. I guess that's part of what you were just referring to.
Yep.
Okay. Abhishek, I'm going to come to you with this question here from should or can service providers provide their continuity plan to the organization?
That's obvious. I think there are no two questions about it. The whole aspect of communication that we were discussing on slide number 14 was all about keeping your enterprise executives aware of what you are doing, and also giving them a quick update, periodic updates on how you are progressing on that. That's going to be really, really important. And the another aspect of that is also ensure that your senior executives are involved in that communication, because at the end of the day, it is the relationships exist between people and not between organizations. And the more your executives, your account teams, your client partners engage on that, that's my message for service providers, the more you will keep your clients comforted.
Yeah, and to the enterprise conversation, I think, you know, understand the stress they're going through as an organization. I think that is you know, that's a reality. And you know, listening to a couple of them talk, it was clear they're trying to do everything they can. They know that, you know, it's not going to be the same for the next X period of days and weeks. So they're working with their clients, and this is probably going to be a force majeure situation. So this is not about, you know, going back and reading the contract to the service provider and saying, hey, you know, you committed to X, Y, Z. This is going to be about how do we get together and get things done, and really take that partnership approach to say, hey, this is not the way it's the same, but here's what we can do, and here's what we can expect. Now, I do not want to sound like we're trying to let the service providers off the hook here. And the same thing with the global business services organizations. I think this is a time where everybody has to step up, and you know, the good partners will step up. Those that are not so good partners will read you the contract or tell you what their service levels are. And I think that's, you know, the part that we're going to go through. You're going to find out who your friends are and who your real partners are, and who those are that are just looking for money from you. The other part that I heard in many of the conversations is this is also a time to act, and then we'll sort things out down the road. And, you know, there's going to be a time of reconciliation between who has to pay for what, and who was really there when they needed them to. Amy, did you see any questions you want to answer?
Yeah, I think that's a great summary. I mean, I see some really good stories here of, you know, service providers coming together. There's a note here about NASSCOM bringing all the competitors together to share best practices in this crisis. I think your point about we know who, this is when we find out who our real partners are. If we have to go to the contract, that's not the relationship we hoped to have. I hear a lot of questions about force majeure. I would hope that we can find workarounds and find solutions before we get to that contractual, step, and it's somewhat of a last resort. So we see a lot of people stepping up in the buy side and the sell side to get through this, and that's really reassuring to me.
Parul, you're coming to us from Gurgaon right now. In your perspective, where does India stand in the life cycle of the pandemic curve here? Is there toilet paper available, or where do we stand?
No, there's enough toilet paper available. I don't think that has been an issue here, Michael, but definitely things are getting pretty serious right now, while some were not taking it seriously before, but we are seeing clean streets right now. Nobody's on the roads. Entire countries on lockdown. Initially, it was just select provinces in each state. So definitely people need to be kind of more vigilant about it. Staying safe is critical, but ensuring the entire overall continuity is also important, especially from a GBS standpoint, as you mentioned, right? Stepping up is key right now. Not only just ensuring to run the business, but also kind of upping the ante and showcasing the capabilities, proving the merit to kind of help the organization move towards overall modernization efforts. That's, I believe, shared services need to kind of step up right now. That's their hour.
Abhishek, there's a question here around laptops and desktops, and there's actually several questions on that. One of them makes a comment about desktops have been transferred to home locations or employee locations. Any comments or thoughts on that?
Yes, absolutely. I have heard of that, and I think in the last few days we have seen these efforts being undertaken at a war footing level, I would say. Since we were talking about the lack of laptops available for people to be able to work from home, and given the prevalence of desktops, what organizations have been doing is trying to get around that custom bonded issue and trying to move desktops actually out to home locations. So that's what has been happening. I hope, and I sincerely hope, that takes care of the service continuity aspect.
Absolutely, Michael. And then also just to add, we've seen some organizations kind of arranging drive-bys, getting pickup services for our employees to come to the office, pick up the desktops. Some companies are also, specifically the analytics firms, right? They're shipping off additional desktops, also monitors if required, because there are multiple screens that employees work. So they're going to that level as well. So multiple examples in the industry right now.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm seeing extreme examples of supply chains getting activated. I gave an example of CEOs talking to device manufacturer CEOs. That's actually happening much more prevalently. I had heard of one example. Today, I heard of the third example. So I think that's people are taking those extreme steps to ensure continuity.
Okay. All right. That's all the time we have here. I wanted to point to our content that we have out there available for you, our blogs and our reports, and there's a podcast we have coming. So it's all available on the website. Certainly, you had our email addresses. There's going to be another opportunity as you leave the webinar for a pop-up that if you want to take one of those offers that we talked about a little earlier, just click on the pop-up and we'll be in touch. And stay safe out there. And again, the sun is out right now. We're in spring. The world's not coming to an end, but we do need to take safety actions now. But more importantly, think about where we're going to be in the next quarter or the quarter beyond, and how we can really make things impressive for our futures. Thanks.
Thank you to Michael, Amy, Parul, and Abhishek, and thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. Again, you will receive a follow-up email within 1 to 2 business days with a link to download the presentation slides, along with accessing the on-demand playback of today's live session. On behalf of Everest Group and our presenters, thank you for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day.